Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Business of Sports show. And today is quite a special episode. I know I say that with all of them, but we have the first returning guest. We have none other than David Moffatt, aka the Moth, coming back to talk about his new project, which actually I say it's new. It's an evolved project that we were talking about in episode one, but also to kind of look at things like the autumn internationals, where things are at the moment, and actually look at some bigger topics in terms of player welfare. So welcome back, David.
Well, thank you. Slightly more hirsute than I was the last time. I've followed your lead, and I'm in the process of growing a beard, but I can't get used to the itch at the moment. But that's just in case I have to go back to Wales for some reason. I can be there incognito.
I was going to say it's a bit of a trend because I had Shaw Fitzpatrick on, and he was growing a beard whilst in quarantine in New Zealand. So more beards. Yeah.
Yeah, my good friend Fitzy. He's a great guy, and I caught the your podcast, and it looked like you had a good deal of fun.
Definitely, and well, not that anybody saw it, but we had to stop it halfway through because he was isolated in a hotel, and around about 9 o'clock, he was meant to have a COVID test. So we had to stop when the door went, but it was just his breakfast turning up. So edited that.
He's a great man. A great man.
Definitely. So what have you been up to? What's this new evolution that you've been planning?
Okay, so when we last spoke, I was talking about rugby rules and about how we wanted to do something. It must have been, was it 4 months ago? Something like that, I guess it would be.
Yeah, I mean, this is episode 12, so yeah, so
yeah,
what, 3-4 months ago when we started?
3-4 months ago. And that was as a result of doing a lot of work because a lot of us are dissatisfied with the way rugby's going. And we basically positioned it in opposition to 15-a-side rugby, and so it was 14-a-side, and but I think as we progressed and we looked at various things and what we could do, what we should be doing, and we did a lot of research. We decided to take a different tack and not try and go up against 15-a-side. Or even down to 7-a-side, but to go for the middle ground. And so we ended up with a game which is 12-a-side, 30-minute halves, pretty much like what rugby rules was originally, but down to 12-a-side. And, all of the innovations that we had in the first game also translate into this one, but there are a couple of really neat innovations as well. I mean, for example, taking a leaf out of, let's say, T20 cricket, we have a situation where there'll be a power play in rugby.
Yeah, I was reading that kind of intrigued me, kind of, because as you said, it's already 12 players, so there's already you're already creating space to run. And and this power play, you can choose the player, and you pick the player to go.
Well, you don't actually pick the player. You just say to the other team, for the next 5 minutes, you've got to lose a player, and then they've got the right to do the same to you as well. And the thing is that it's not so. It's about developing excitement. It's about involving the crowd, for crying out loud. We seem to have forgotten that these people who pay money to come and watch the game, we want their involvement. So, so you're right. In between the 10th minute and the 50th minute, not the first 10 or the last 10 minutes, you can say to the opposition, rightio, referee, would you please ask the opposition to drop a player off? And then they could do the same thing at the same time and ask you to do that, or they could wait. Anyway, it becomes very tactical, and that's one of the things that we really want to get into this game. We want players on the field to think, because I think that's being lost at the moment. They're like robots, and so and then one of the other things that we've done, and I suppose, you know, what are we looked at and said, what are we about? We're about scoring tries. Okay. So we decided that we could also save some time if we did away with conversion kicks following a try.
Yeah.
So we said we'd do that, and at the same time, you know, we increased the value of a try to 7 points. We're also doing away with drop goals, and once again, that'll save, you know, ball in hand, ball in play time.
Yeah.
And a penalty is still going to be worth 2 points. So a try is now worth 3.5 times what a penalty's worth. So now you have a situation in the game that's evolved today where most scrums are not there to restart play, but they're being used to get penalties. And the reason for that is that a penalty is half the value of a try currently, 6 points. So you've got, you know, a penalty is 2 times, or sorry, a try is 2 times the value of a penalty, where we're moving it to 3.5 times. So we're saying score tries, you know, rather than spend all of your effort trying to win penalties. And of course, you know, there will be teams that will try that, but I think they'll come unstuck. And if you remember also with our sending off rule, the yellow card, is it now, we've gone away from black and blue, but the red and yellow cards, a red card is still the same now, in that if a player is red carded, they go off, but they can be immediately replaced, right?
Yeah.
At that point in time, there's no penalty, except that the referee then pulls out a blue card and says to the other team, you've got this blue card, which is a double card, and you can double the score of your choosing, the next score of your choosing. That could be a 7-point try or a 2-point penalty. So, you know, that once again, I think is going to bring tactics into it, because the team that's back to full strength is going to know that at some stage they're going to use that blue card to get to a 14-point try. So they better get their foot down and continue to score tries. So it's that sort of thing. The other thing that we're doing, which is a little bit different, is that we're allowing teams to have up to 8 players on the bench, right? But they can only use 4 replacements.
Okay. So yeah. So
this is even newer than
leaf out of football.
Yeah, we're taking a leaf out of football. Yeah. Because when you have a look around at other sports, they got some good things, you know, and we're saying, you know, there's too much opportunity in a 15-a-side game to actually run on a whole lot of players, you know, that are big, you know, 110 kilos, 120 kilos, fresh, and they just stand there and batter the hell out of the, you know, so there's no space and time being created. Well, we're already going to have that with only 12 players, but we also believe that this should be a game of attrition, like it used to be. Well, once upon a time, before you were even born, there were no replacements allowed at all. You know, if somebody went off with a broken leg, they were down to 14 men.
Yeah, and even the point structure, again, you know, kicks were worth a lot less. You know, as they kind of say, you know, with today's kind of game about keeping the scoreboard ticking over, you know, take the 3 points, take the 3 points. You know, if you've got 30 minutes left, but you're 11 points down, you know what? Take the penalty, knock the 3 points off, keep the scoreboard going. And I think, having kind of read through your new larger dossier, because I think it's more than double the size of the original rugby rules one, but kind of looking at it, a lot more kind of has gone into it, and as you said, you've kind of taken a few other elements. That power play kind of really does intrigue me, with the fact that you've already got 12 players, so technically in your defensive line you've already got that 3-player gap, and you know, you're doing things like scrums have to be set in 30 seconds, and you know, the whole thing is about getting the game moving and flowing, and all of a sudden you can just play this card, right? You're gone for a few minutes,
5 minutes,
they're they're down to 11 players.
11.
And I think, you know, if it got picked up and people started playing it, you know, it returns the game to players being full athletes. And I'm not saying they're not athletes now. It's just as we were discussing beforehand, you know, players are now built for, you know, for their specific roles and everything. And when you've got people like Eddie Jones coming out and saying that the England game is based upon a solid defence, we said it earlier. You know, the Gatland era with Wales was based on that solid defence. You know, even the French game now, because of Sean Edwards going there, they've started to have a real focus on having that unity in defence. It just turns the current game into a game of aerial ping pong, and I suppose people don't necessarily see anything wrong with that from the inside point of view, because at the moment there's no crowds to kind of go, we're bored of this. And even looking at the Wales England game the other day in the Autumn Nations, the first 20 minutes was literally aerial ping pong, box kicks, you know, kicks out over the 22, just literally like a game of tennis. You're getting a bad neck, nobody's really running or doing anything, they're just waiting for mistakes. And ultimately, even as a diehard Wales fan, you know, the Wales try came from an England kicking mistake. Not through any kind of attacking impetus or anything like that. It was a kick mistake. And
so all the rules
it's
still,
boring then.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, that's fine. You know, for the 50, if that's the way they want the 15-a-side game to go, that's fine. But what we want is a contest for possession as well. There's no contest for possession any longer. That's why they have to kick the ball, because they can't get through this defense. The only way they're able to do it, because you get 15 players lined up across the field, you know, and they've got their defensive lines and drills are down, honed really, really well. The other team spend all their time bashing into them, looking to try and get through, or then they put the box kick up and hopefully they'll get a knock on or they'll get a penalty out of it. And then they'll scrum for a penalty, which I find bizarre. I mean, anybody could coach that game. You just pick 23 of the biggest players that you can find, coach them to collide with the opposition time and time and time again, and then kick the ball. And if they get a scrum for a penalty. And that's one of the other things that I think that'll make our game a little bit fairer, if you like, is that if you get a penalty and you kick the ball into the corner, you don't get to throw the ball in. The other team gets to throw the ball in. Because that'll do away with these incessant rolling mauls, which are almost impossible to defend. Because when the ball comes down, the players are allowed to transfer the ball back to the back of a maul. But in fact, everybody that's in front of that ball is technically offside, or they are guilty of obstruction. It's the only part of the game where offside and obstruction doesn't come into it. We say in a maul, you move the ball back one player, then the ball's got to be out in 5 seconds. You know, so that stops all that stuff. And so then it becomes a game of more tactics and using those will-o'-the-wisp players. And it's going to be a game, a proper game for players of all shapes and sizes. You know, I mean, it's not at the moment. I couldn't get a game. You have a look. I mean, JJ Williams just passed away. Would he have got a game in this current, you know, obsession with size? You know, would it, you know, Barry John was a bigger guy, but even then, those guys, you know, those great Welsh players that, you know what I think about Welsh rugby? They've still got that sort of player, mate. No, they've still got that sort of player. They've still got the players with that innate ability to move the ball, step off their left and right foot. But unfortunately, that's all been coached out of them. And it's a shame, because we want to see, what we'll be looking for is different teams playing different ways. It's not McDonald's rugby, which is what I've called it, I think, since the last time we spoke. You know, at the moment, you're watching McDonald's rugby. It's the same in every town, in every city, in every country in the world. you know. I mean, and you know, if the All Blacks and the Wallabies swapped jerseys the other day, you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference because they all play exactly the same way.
Yeah, and if everybody's playing the same way, that you're going to end up with a cellmates. You know, they cancel each other out because
exactly
they're just, again, it just becomes a game of who's going to make a mistake first.
Yep.
And that's
so where is the flair of the French, and where is the running rugby of Australia? Right, I mean, Australia. You think about those great Australian teams, the Campeses and the Mark Ellis and those. Where are they? They aren't there any longer. And you know, or the great Welsh players. You know, even you know, a guy like Halfpenny. I mean, he's lucky to get a game now because of his lack of size, but he's a good goal kicker.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I remember, you know, years ago, you know, seeing an interview with him where he said, you know, people said that he would never be a good professional rugby player because of his size. Because again, in the time where you've got the massive giants in the backs and you know, even bigger players in the forwards, you know, you can't really distinguish between a forward and a back sometimes.
No.
And then you've got Halfpenny, you know, or even if you look at Shane Williams. Now, years and years ago, I was fortunate to win a competition when Graham Henry was still coach, and I got to train with some of the Wales players: Dai Young, Chris Wyatt, Garen Jenkins, and Shane Williams. I was still in secondary school. I was bigger than him. I was taller than him and everything. And claim to fame, I did flatten him on that day during the training. But yeah, you kind of go, well, hang on. How would he stand? And
I can tell you what he thinks, if you like, because I did a podcast and he was on it, you know, a couple of months ago. And he said that he, you know, when he looks at these players, he wouldn't most likely get a game any longer, you know, because these guys are just too big, too difficult to stop.
And again, when you've got that,
and he's a great guy.
Defense, totally. And when you've got that kind of iron defense, his jinking running, even you know, at the height of his powers, still wouldn't kind of get through because of the fact that it is literally just it's that rugby league defense. You know, it's that bang into a brick wall, and for a couple of tries, and if you can't get through it, try and chip the ball over it and try and get a bit of possession. Try
5 tackle kick is what I called rugby league before I went to rugby league, which is what it is. We've become unlimited tackle kick. Now, I don't want to be sounding too negative because eventually I think they'll sort stuff out, you know, because you know, the weight of public opinion will say, no, we don't want to watch this much any longer. In the meantime, though, we think that we can actually do rugby a service by actually putting on this new form of rugby, which is largely a new sport because it's got so many different things to say. Yeah, sure, it's got scrums, rucks, mauls, lineouts, but the way in which all that works is completely different. And that's what it should be viewed as, is different. You know, it's not in competition. We're not in competition with 15s or 7s. We might be in competition with 10s, but 10s basically is exactly the same. They play under the same laws, so not much changes other than there's only 10 players on it.
Yeah, so, and it's 7s plus 3. There's not a lot more to it.
So that's where we've evolved to.
Do you think? So the RFU have come out in the last couple of weeks and said, or the last week, and said about the return to grassroots rugby, but without scrums, without mauls. Do you think that that's potentially something that they're going to continue going forward? Because if they're going to start getting people to do it now, as you said, scrums are just for penalties. They've often been complained about on the international scene for wasting time, boring to watch. Obviously, as a player, you know, I love scrummaging, but from a spectator point of view, when you have collapsed scrums because both teams are potentially going for the penalty, it's not a fair contest, and then you end up with 2, 3, 4 minutes with the same scrum just being resets and the players being spoken to. Do you think that them now kind of saying that grassroots rugby, look, no scrums and no mauls because of COVID and stuff, that's potentially a glimpse of what's to come? Maybe.
I think they'd have to be very careful because if that were to be the case, they may as well just go and play rugby league. I mean, we know that that the game at the moment resembles a lot of rugby league, but if they were to do that, I think they'd be better off looking at us and sort of saying, okay, here's this sport, and they still have rucks and mauls, but they're safer, and they're also easier to referee, understand, and watch because people know what's going on, and you don't have people that are potentially offside like in mauls or obstructing. And the scrum, there's only one reset of a scrum, and the ball has to go in the middle, and we will insist on that. And also both hookers have to hook for the ball. Now you're a front rower, so you don't see the hookers hooking for a ball any longer. But the requirement on them will be to hook for it. You never know; they might actually win the occasional tight head.
Well, I mean, it's also the fact that these days only part of the ball has to go down the middle. Years gone by, the middle of the ball had to go down the middle of the channel. But these days, it's literally, well, you can be over your side as long as the end of the ball is in the center. So that, and again, I've spoken to several international scrum halves and things like that, and again, when they put the ball in, they put the spin on it. So it's straight there. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of comes back.
So the next big step for us is to get the game played, and we are on track to have it played early in the new year in both Australia and New Zealand, because that's when our games start. We're still hopeful that it can be played in some schools up in the UK, but depending upon this COVID stuff and how it affects them. So, we're because we're sure that once we get the game played, iron out any little wrinkles that there might be that we haven't thought about, that this will be a game that people will like to watch and to play. And it's going to be different. But what I would say to World Rugby is, look, don't dismiss us. Let's work together in that respect, and they won't like everything that we do, and that's fine, because they're not going to go to power plays and stuff like that. But there are going to be some things, that like, for example, kicking the ball into touch. Why not go back to the original law, which was that the team that didn't kick the ball in touch gets to put the throw in? That'll stop a lot of that. Anyway, we'll see how we go. It's been a lot of hard work getting to where we are today. We're still hopeful that it might be successful one day.
Well, that's the thing, seeing the evolution, because I remember reading the first iteration of it, and I remember kind of looking at it and going, "Oh, that's a bit different." Kind of reading through this latest one, I said it to you earlier in terms of, it's a bigger proposition now. It's been fleshed out. I mean, not that we're going to share the document with anybody, but you've got the diagrams of the pitch and the scrum areas and things like that. So for instance, just to explain that, scrums can only take place in a certain area of the pitch, rather than being on the sides or anything like that. So again, spelling out those kind of details, it'll be interesting to see if it's picked up. And I think with the fact that a lot of teams haven't, or a lot of nations haven't allocated funding to sevens, for instance, so the seven circuit has been shut down, whether this can start to replace that, for instance.
Can I just make an interesting point to you, because I've been speaking to a lot of the smaller countries about this, and one of the things that's becoming evident is that sevens is taking over from 15-a-side rugby, in a lot of the smaller countries. A country like Sri Lanka, for example, which has got a great rugby background. They may, in actual fact, think more. Well, they might put a bigger focus on sevens because sevens is an Olympic sport for a start.
Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of those smaller countries are looking at the way the game's played now, and they actually don't relate to it.
Yeah.
So what we say is, look, we're developed and developing this game, which is an authentic game of rugby, which has all the elements that you would expect from a game of rugby, but without the sort of requirement to have all these behemoths playing the game.
Yeah.
Because what we'd like to do is, and you've got countries like India and Asia, and the Asian countries, even in America, there is this game may find some space there because of its simplicity, easy to understand for the American audiences. So that's something we want to do, because one of the biggest things about rugby is the camaraderie. Now, and I was brought up in Kenya, and I've often said I don't understand why Kenya plays 15-a-side rugby anymore, because they're actually quite good at sevens. You put them in against the All Blacks, it's 200-0. But I don't agree with myself on that much anymore, and because I think there's got to be room for an authentic game of rugby, where the camaraderie of rugby is still alive and well, which you most likely don't get in sevens, but you would get in a 12s to 15s, if you know what I mean. So I think that's very, very much worth keeping, to be perfectly honest with you. And and that's some of the things. Those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about when we go to full launch of the game.
Because that is a big element of rugby, and the accessibility of players, the team elements of it. I've spoken to several people on this podcast about the accessibility of players, and the fact that you probably wouldn't see the likes of David Beckham down your local Sainsbury's or something, but you may see the likes of the Sam Canes of this world, at the equivalents in New Zealand. And actually that kind of brings us on to quite nicely to some of the other elements that I wanted to talk to you about, because player welfare is such a huge thing. And as you said, if you pitted a team like Kenya against New Zealand in 15s, they can't compete on shape and size of player. They might be fit, but they're just going to get absolutely battered. It's like putting a grassroots team against Saracens, for instance. They're bigger and bulkier. But in terms of player welfare, do you think, I know that there are things like the WRPA and people like that. Do you think the unions need to get more involved in helping players transition from play into retirement? Because a lot of people have spoken on this podcast, on other podcasts, about the void afterwards. I mean, I had, say, for instance, I had Derek Redmond on a couple of weeks ago, the British athlete, and saying about training in 4-year cycles to get to the Olympics, and then whether you win or lose at the Olympics, well, that's your cycle gone, and you kind of, what are you training for now? And it's the same as you've gone from eating, sleeping, and breathing a sport to then being retired.
Well, and I think there's been an article about Dylan Hartley recently, where he expressed his real concerns because, and like so many of the players these days, they find it difficult to get out of bed because of all the injuries that they've incurred during their careers. But once they finish playing rugby, there's nobody there to help them with the costs of those injuries.
Yeah.
Now, I know that the players' associations are really concerned about this, and I think they're right to be concerned about it. But I think the unions also have to do their bit. And I don't know if they are or they aren't, to be perfectly honest with you. But if we were to take the view that these players are responsible for most of the money that comes into rugby these days, right? And some would say it's very lopsided, and it is, but that's the fact.
Yeah.
Then there's got to be money put aside for players after they play. After they finish playing. And of course, with the way the game is at the moment, there are more players suffering from concussions, from a variety of, collision injuries and the like, which they can get over when they're younger. But what worries me is, what are they going to be like when they're 50 and 60?
Well, this is the thing. We haven't seen an old professional really yet.
No.
So even all the gym work that they do, and yes, whilst they have physios and things like that, you still got guys who are squatting huge amounts of weights, trying to bench press, so a hell of a lot more weight, and you kind of go, actually, how much is that going to affect them when they're older, as well as all the collision injuries, as well as all the every player I've ever spoken to from a professional point of view has always said that they are always playing injured. Yeah.
And you see so where is the duty of care in all of this?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we won't want to get involved with our game, is that this game is going to be a contact sport, a legitimate contact sport, but it won't be a collision sport. I mean, I still see players being taken out on the side of rucks and moors when they don't have the ball. And the last time I looked at the laws, that's illegal. So I think there is a duty of care, and at some point in time, like a lot of these things, the more litigious that society becomes, the more they're likely to face some serious issues. Nobody's suggesting, for example, that we need to go and play in pads and helmets and things like that, like in American football, but because they have their own problems there anyway, irrespective. And some people would say that if you've got all that padding and helmets, it makes you even more reckless.
Well, look at the size of those players.
Yeah,
they're even bigger because they're only in action for a few seconds at a time, and then they get to go off for a bit. They're even bigger. They're even stronger. Faster, fitter, and having all the pads and helmets and things like that gives the false reality, or the false kind of thought of, actually, I can hit even harder now because I'm more protected. Well, you know what? There's an equal force coming at you, and it's going to hurt just as much, even though you've got the pads.
And they're very concerned about the size of the players that are currently being bred to play that game. So I think it's right to raise these issues, and hopefully the powers that be are taking great note of what's happening in other sports. I mean, even if you take football, for example, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that those players who played in the era of sodden leather footballs and heading them, I mean, I played a lot of football in my time, with leather balls, the old 8-panel balls and things like that. I mean, but even now, I mean, if your head hits a ball, your brain keeps moving inside your skull. So there's a lot of debate going on around that. But there are players we know in football that have suffered dementia, which they put down to playing the game, and you wouldn't necessarily think of that.
There was I think he was an ex-Bath and played a few times for England. His name escapes me at the moment, but wrote an article for the papers a few weeks ago where he was talking about, he's only 40, but he's got the early signs of things like dementia and things like that, because he's had multiple concussions, multiple injuries, and I certainly know from looking at some of the comments from players that I've played with, and I know that when this article surfaced, and these are amateur players, and their concerns then of going, well, actually, I've had multiple concussions, and I've done this and I've done that. So it's even the knock-on effect to the non-professional as well. which
And
is
it's
worrying,
likely
really.
even to be worse because they don't have the fitness or the strength, or the skill level to be able to cope with it. But they try and emulate what they see on television. And of course, the coaches play a big part in all of this. I'm always concerned about the role that they play in the way in which the game has evolved. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic. We want to actually provide another alternative, but we'd rather now we've moved to a position where we would say, but nobody's sort of, we're not talking to them at the moment. They're not talking to us, whatever. With World Rugby is to say, look, we can fulfill a great service here, and it may very well be that the game develops it shouldn't, because it should be the same from kids all the way through up to internationals, but it's definitely not. And it hasn't been like that for some time. And I guess if it goes the way it's going at the moment, then there may come a call for rules, the laws of professional rugby to be different. I'm not quite sure that would be the right way to go, but it would be better if the laws, I mean, let's face it, these days when everybody's only got a very small amount of time and they got a short attention spans, they want to be entertained.
Yeah. They want value for their money, because let's face it, ticket prices are going up and up and up and up. And therefore there's a bigger demand on what you get for that.
And they will get it. I'm sure they'll
experience.
Yeah. So
I mean, let's kind of go back to when you were CEO of the Welsh Rugby Union. Now, I'm sure most people are aware, unfortunately, about a week ago, Christophe Dominici unfortunately passed away through various circumstances. So back when you were CEO of the Welsh Rugby Union, was there anything, what was the kind of focus on mental health?
There wasn't that much. No, there wasn't that much. I mean, there was a burgeoning interest and desire to actually work with the players' associations to ensure the welfare of players. More to do, I think, with their financial welfare initially, rather than mental. And of course, that's not been the first case. A couple down in Australia, and there's
unfortunately,
high-profile Wallaby.
Well, even outside of sports, unfortunately, suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 40, which is a terrifying statistic. When you
there are
think
even
about
statistics at the moment that suicide is actually taking more lives than the COVID, because of the pressures that are coming on as a result of it. But I don't know whether that's anecdotal or whether it's true. But in sport, I mean, one is too many, and there has to be that focus. And I think they're playing catch up, but I'll take some of the blame for that as well. We're always playing catch up with what's actually happening. We're never ahead of the game when it comes to this sort of thing. And to be ahead of the game, to be perfectly honest with you, it's going to take spending a huge amount of money on that aspect of the game. And as we know now, it's even tighter than it ever was before. So, getting the funds to be able to sufficiently fund that sort of thing is always going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and I know that a lot more has gone into kind of mental readiness in terms of the actual playing side of things. But again, going back to player welfare, it's that void of when you're actually a player or a professional player, certainly, you're told what to do, when to eat, and you have those kind of schedules. and you're taken care of because you're in the bubble. But the moment you leave that, it's even down to the simplicity of when I've heard about people leaving the team's WhatsApp group, and from 1 minute, you're getting this constant barrage of messages, and I've seen it myself in terms of you're getting the constant banter from the guys, and then all of a sudden you stop playing and you leave that group, and it's that silence. And I know
so this is something I call when the phone stops ringing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's something that I experienced as well, at various times. More particularly, I think, after I left Welsh Rugby, which was the last role that I had, which was right at the pointy end of lots of things happening every day. Every day was different and what have you. And there's very little that that you can replace that with. People are interested in what you want to say. For example, when I was running New Zealand rugby, I'd be on the media more than the Prime Minister, back in those days, because people are more interested in rugby than they are in politics. And when that stops, it leaves a big void. And I suffered from depression. And I forced gave my brain a good talking to and said, well, we can't afford to have this any longer. So you better spend a lot of your time being productive. And that's why I do things like this and, radical business and things like that. I invent things for me to do. But I can understand players, a player who, especially the elite players, who have fated. And I mean, take a look at one of the most famous sportsmen the world's ever seen, who recently just died, Maradona. I mean, he battled his demons. And I think largely it was because when he stopped playing, I mean, he still was, and he was still a god in Argentina. But when you stop playing, it must be a big void. And it's the same with like the Dominicis of this world, all those really, players that excite and they get the roar of the crowd and it's gone, and I don't know the obviously the details, but I can understand. Why sports and comedians as well. I mean, you have a look at some of the great comedians of this, of this world, and they suffer from depression. Robin Williams, a guy that I took Jonah Lomu to meet in San Francisco because he wanted an All Black jersey, and so I flew Jonah Lomu at the height of his career to San Francisco to meet Robin Williams, and there's a picture of that there's a building in San Francisco with it's sort of like a big pyramid type building, and there's Robin Williams sitting on Jonah Lomu's shoulders. I mean, but that was because I saw in the news that he wanted an All Black jersey, so I said, right here, we will, we'll make that happen. But look at him, committed suicide.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the greatest, funniest people you ever come across, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Something, you don't know.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of kind of interviews and read a lot of kind of articles around this, and again, I think it all comes down to the fact of, and certainly with rugby, with the fact that it's a macho sport. It's you've got to be big and strong to compete and to be successful, but it also then almost means that we don't talk to people. That sometimes the chatter between teammates is just banter rather than anything else. And I think that's certainly something. And again, I part of this, I was watching the good, the bad, and the rugby with James Haskell and Mike Tyndall, and they were talking with Benjamin Gayser, and saying, and I mean, I know James Haskell has said previously when he's found out teammates have been suffering from depression and stuff, that he said, well, why didn't they come to him? and I know that he's seen as somebody that has a good time and lots of banter and stuff. But actually, you know what? I think with a lot of your teammates, if you do actually talk, they'll listen. And
Yeah.
again, this goes back to what we were talking about with your 30-30 rugby and the camaraderie and teammates and things like that. Because
Absolutely, yeah. But there needs to be some sort of um, uh, uh, a safety net system put in place for after playing, and that's going to largely, a lot of that can come from their teammates who are, not suffering the same sort of thing. I've just put up on the thing here a picture of Jonah and Robin Williams. I don't know if you can open it. And
we'll put that into put that into the video as well, so to show that. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of got a bit deep and heavy at the moment, and rightly so. I mean, mental health and things like that are a big topic, and we'll put some links to again some mental health charities in here. But what do you think is the solution really? Should the unions be doing more?
Look, I don't have a solution. I mean, this is an area where I don't have a great deal of expertise. But all I do know is that to do it properly is going to take a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that is going to be an issue for rugby unions. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Whether it's their responsibility or government responsibility, but then I hesitate to say government because in actual fact, governments start off with no money at all. They only get their money from taxes and borrowings. So when we say government, we're talking about the taxpayer or the banks. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have, unlike me, I don't have a ready answer because I think it is so complex.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's not the answer, but if anybody's watching, if anybody is watching this episode, what I would suggest, think of somebody who I haven't spoken to in a long time and just pick up the phone or drop them a text message and just ask them, how they are, because I think that one simple human interaction can make a difference.
Yeah.
Without getting too kind of hot and heavy kind
of
into that.
That's right.
But
yeah.
So let's kind of get back to it. So one final thing then, what's your take on the autumn internationals? or should I even ask?
Do you really want me to? I
turned off.
Well, I turned off the Wales-England game at half-time. I just couldn't watch it. It's a difficult period, difficult games. I just can't. I'm struggling because I'd like to say something positive, but I'm afraid that the games were a complete turnoff, and in actual fact, the games over here weren't that much better as a spectacle. I mean, the All Blacks scored a lot of points the other day against Argentina, but we must remember Argentina hadn't played for 10 months.
Yeah.
They get down here, and when they play the Wallabies tomorrow, they will have played 5 games in a row. Neither Australia or New Zealand did that. They got breaks.
Yeah.
Between their games. And this is yet another example of, well, Argentina's not a minnow, but by comparison, they're most likely ahead of Australia on the world order, but, but getting a rough deal. Argentina have had a rough deal, and they looked absolutely buggered when they played the All Blacks the other day. And they made some really weird, positional change selections, but it's not. Fairness is a very, very important thing. Yeah. So that. I was just raising that in terms of what's happened here in the Southern Hemisphere. As to the Northern Hemisphere, it's just the same old, mate.
I think the only positive we can really take, and I know I'll probably get some backlash from friends on this. Certainly from the England viewpoint. The only good thing to come out of the autumn internationals, I think, is Georgia's exposure to higher tier rugby.
Yeah.
And like they've said, don't judge us on how we do this time around. Judge us on our next competition. And I think those players, and let's face it, England, might have done, was it 40-0 against them, but it took them 20, 25 minutes to even get onto the scoreboard. Wales, even though I'll say that it was a development team that was put out, and again, I'll get some backlash from friends on that, but it took, Wales didn't impress against them realistically. It was like 18-0, and then Ireland was it 20 points to or 20 something to 10. So that's what I kind of see as a positive, thinking about the game in general, is that a team like Georgia, who really only play teams like England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, when it comes to World Cups, if they're in the same pool and if they've qualified, them getting more exposure to playing these guys. And I think that's
going to be difficult, Matt, because the Six Nations is pretty much a closed shop.
Oh yeah.
But they're happy for the rest of the world to play in development competitions. For example, before COVID tore the whole thing up, you had Super Rugby players traveling around the world once at least, right around the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And then they'd most likely do it twice when they were playing Argentina. The furthest that anybody has to travel, let's say from Wales, is that 2-hour flight to Italy.
Yeah.
But it's a very much a closed shop.
Oh,
and
God,
until they actually say, well, we've got a wider obligation to the world than just our Six Nations, I don't think it'll change. The Southern Hemisphere, I mean, and they've done some stupid things. In Super Rugby, it destroyed Super Rugby, going to 18 teams and involving Japanese teams and all this sort of thing. I mean, it just absolutely destroyed the authenticity of it.
Yeah.
It just became a development competition, and it's not their job to develop. And that's what Six Nations will say. It's not their job to develop rugby. But because of the proximity in Europe to a lot of the teams that could become quite good, and one would say the same thing here about the Pacific Islands.
Yeah.
I mean, we should always be doing more for them. The biggest problem comes back to money. When anything to do with professional sport is money, and they don't generate any money in the islands, so they don't go there all that often. But if they were to have a Pacifica team, for example, that was based in New Zealand, then that might change. So yeah, we're trying to solve a lot of the problems of the rugby world that are quite difficult, actually. And neither me or you have any power to do it.
No, exactly. Not unless we win copious amounts of money on the lottery and kick things off in a revolution. But look, David, it's been absolutely fantastic having you back on, and I'm sure when we kick off season 2 in January, February, we'll no doubt have you as a regular returning guest with bringing much controversy and insight into the workings of the game. But it'll be interesting to see, as you said, you're aiming to kick this rugby revolution off early next year. So it'll be fascinating to see the first few games taking action and what the feedback is from people. Yep. But yes, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, mate. We're looking forward to it. And who knows? It might be the start of something, extraordinary, or it might just fail. But at least we'll give it a go.
Start somewhere. Exactly. You've got to start somewhere, and somebody's got to do something to liven the game up and take it away from aerial ping pong.
Okay, mate. Have a good Christmas, Matt.
You too, David. You too.
And all your viewers. Yep. Okay.
Well, guys, make sure you subscribe to the channel and all the podcasts as well. We've had some fantastic guests on the show so far, and we've got some amazing people lined up as well. So make sure you subscribe and yeah, stay safe and Merry Christmas if you don't watch another one.